Chapter 4. The king was praying in his chamber when he was interrupted by Ranjit Singh. He came into the room and bowed down. "Your Majesty, the prince has returned." The king got up and asked, "What happened? Did they retreat? Did we win?" But the soldier replied, with tears rolling down his eyes, "No, Your Majesty, the prince is injured. He was hit by a poisoned arrow." The king couldn't move. He didn't know what to do and how to respond. His son, his only son, was injured. "Your Majesty, are you all right?" asked the soldier, to which the king replied, "Take me to him." As the king reached the prince's chamber, he saw blood all over the floor. The prince was lying on the bed. His arrow had been removed and his wound had been bandaged. But the Vaidya, the medic, looked worried. He quickly ran to the bedside and sat near his son. "He will be all right, won't he?" The room was silent. "I asked you something." "The arrow was poisoned, my lord, and we don't have the antidote. It will take time to find a herb. But unfortunately, the prince has already lost a lot of blood and he might not be able to make the time." "No!" shouted the king, and so loud was his voice that it scared everyone in the room. "This is not possible. You are the best medics in the whole kingdom, and you can't save my son? No, no, I won't lose him. He's the only one I have. No, not again." The medic were silent. They too were in pain. The prince had always treated them as family, and they felt ashamed that they couldn't do anything for him. Down in the city, Maharishi was moving quickly towards the palace. He had come to know about what had happened to the prince and about the approaching enemy. He entered the palace and went to the prince's chamber. When he entered the chamber, he saw the prince lying on the bed, becoming paler with every passing moment, and his father standing at the balcony praying to the gods for a miracle. Seeing the Maharishi, the main medic quickly ran to him and said, "Your Majesty, I am glad you are here. His condition has worsened. He has been hit by a poisonous arrow." "I know the details," said the Maharishi. "What about the herb?" "We have sent men, the fastest riders we have, but chances are very low. The king has gone silent. We are worried for him. I think you should talk to him," said the main medic and signaled the rest to leave the room. The Maharishi went to the king and put his arm on his shoulder. Somehow the king knew it was the Maharishi. He quickly turned and hugged him. He cried and cried till his eyes ran out of tears. "I am going to lose him too. I don't want to lose him. He is the only family I have got. I had promised his mother that I will not let anything happen to him. Maharshi, you are the most learned person this land has ever seen. You have done and seen things that no one can ever imagine. You know all the mystic arts. Can't you save my son?" Heartbroken, seeing his most loved person in pain, Maharshi said, "Son, I can do many things, but I cannot undo what has been already done." The king, in anger, struck the balcony pillar with his fist. All he wanted to do was to travel around the world. He wanted to learn stories and tell stories. He didn't want to be part of all this. I dragged him into this, and look what has happened. Saying this, the king took the prince's diary in his hand, showed it to Maharshi, and said, What kind of a father I am, teacher, if I can't fulfill my son's only desire? What kind of a king I am if I couldn't even make my own son happy? Maharshi was shocked. He took the book in his hand. This belonged to him? Yes, replied the king. He used to write his stories in it. His eyes still fixed at the book, the Maharshi said. I had a dream last night. In the dream, I saw the prince standing with this book in his hand, smiling at me, and then suddenly a storm of blue feathers took him away, leaving this book behind. I felt like coming and seeing the prince. Till now, I was not sure of the reason for the dream, but after seeing this book, I think I know what it means. I don't understand what you're saying. What does that dream mean? Asked the king. There is an ancient magic through which one's soul can be transferred into objects. Such objects become magical. Tantrics use these mantras to transfer their consciousness into objects so that they can live even when their bodies have been destroyed. This magic is dark in nature, but given our circumstances, it can be used to preserve the soul of the prince. His soul can be saved and his dream can be fulfilled. I know it sounds strange, but I'm just saying what I saw. Maybe that is destiny. But it is up to you, my son. Before he could answer, Ranjit Singh came running with news. Your Majesty, our forces have been defeated. The enemy is at our gates. The king went into a shock. All the atrocities that the enemy is going to bring forth on his kingdom, the burning houses, the slaughtering of innocents, the bloody streets. Words were not coming out of his mouth. His heart was beating faster than ever. I have failed my people. I have failed as a king, he thought. He was moving into depression. That suddenly Maharishi said, Your Majesty, this is not the time for doubt. You're the king. Act like one. These words from his teacher snapped the king out of the shock. Prepare the cannons. Close the gates. Send every soldier to the wall and the entrance. They are here for a war. We will give them a war that they will remember for generations to come. The king was not the man he was once, but his words sounded as if he still had one more fight left in him. The soldiers who heard his voice got filled with energy. They passed on the message, and it brought back the strength and confidence that they had lost, and they all marched towards the gate. The king then turned towards the Maharishi and said, Do it, teacher. Do whatever you can to give my son his second chance. Maharishi nodded and quickly moved towards the bed where the prince lied. His face had turned completely pale and his heartbeat was getting lower every second. He was going to die any minute now. The Maharishi took out his kamandal, his wooden oblong pot, sat down in Sukhasan with his leg crossed, kept the book in front of him and started chanting mantras. The king rushed to his chamber where he put on his armor and took his sword and shield and got ready for battle. He discussed the strategy and formation for the battle with his commanders. Then he rushed to his son's chamber. When he entered the chamber, his heart was filled with joy and shock. He saw his son sit up on his bed. The book was in the air and the Maharshi was chanting his mantras. The king ran to the bedside. My son, forgive me. I'm really sorry. I have always loved you, but I never showed you my love. I put you in this position. I sent you to the battlefield. I'm sorry, son. but I have always loved you more than anything I have ever loved." His son looked at him and said, with a smile on his face, "I know, Father, I love you too, and protecting my kingdom was my duty. You didn't make me do it. Don't blame yourself for any of it. Now, goodbye, Father. And if the gods desire, I would love to be born as your son once again." And then the book opened, and he burst into 1,000 blue feathers, which flew into the book. When the last feather had entered the book, it started glowing very brightly and closed. Then the book transformed. The whole cover of the book was covered with blue feathers. A chain grew out of the back cover, reaching out to the front cover, where it connected to a peacock-shaped lock that had a pink diamond at the center of it. The book then slowly came down onto the ground, and Maharshi stopped his chanting. He opened his eyes and looked at the king, who stood there with a smile on his face and tears rolling down his eyes. "It is done," said the Rishi. The moment he said that, the body of the prince that lied on the bed suddenly turned into dust and flew out of the balcony. A loud sound shook the whole palace. Ranjit Singh came running to the king. "They have entered the palace, Your Majesty. You need to exit the palace through the escape room." The king turned to the Maharishi and said, "Teacher, please take my son and leave the palace." "But Your Majesty," interrupted Ranjit Singh, "I am the king of this kingdom, my friend. If I will not fight for it, who will?" The king kissed the book, and then he gave it to the Maharishi. "Now I can die peacefully, knowing that my son lives, and my kingdom, my people will live through him forever." Maharshi took the book and hugged the king for one last time and hurried to the secret stairs. The kingdom was conquered and was destroyed by the enemies. They made sure that each and every book that talked about the history of the kingdom or the king was burned. Each and every person who could talk was killed. Every memory was erased from the minds of the people, and the once great kingdom got lost in time. But as the king had said, he and his people had become immortal through his son. The Maharishi had wrote to Takshashila, the first university of the world, where he placed the book in the greatest library of the world. It sat there as an ordinary book, but it was not ordinary. Its magic gave it many powers, and one of it was that once kept in any building, all stories in and of the building, the people who had ever been in the building, each and everything, all the knowledge within the premises of the building since its first brick would come to the book, and it will know everything and everyone within those walls. The book sat in the library, collecting knowledge from the thousands of books in there and the people who came in and went for years to come. But in time, Takshashila was attacked by invaders, and the library was set on fire. As the books burnt and were being destroyed, the book disappeared from its place on the large shelf and reappeared in some other land far, far away. Since then, it has been traveling across lands, mountains, and oceans, learning stories of all the people across all the nations, collecting those stories within as the prince had dreamed. Where is the book now? Nobody knows. Maybe it's in a library. Maybe it is, or maybe it's on a ship, or on a flight. Or maybe It's in an abandoned house, waiting for a boy to come and read it.